Hello and welcome to View from a Commentary Box, and that is the commentary box at BT Murrayfield, because today it was Scotland against Ireland. Scotland going for the Triple Crown, Ireland still on track for the Grand Slam. It ended 22 points to 7 in favour of Ireland, and as usual we've got our staff members here who have been witnessing this, including Stuart McFarlane, of course, who was commentating for BBC Radio Scotland. What were your own thoughts on the game, Stuart?
Very balanced first 40 minutes. I think both sides left some points out in the park. That was certainly the case for Scotland. I think they were going in at half time. They'd be pretty confident that a good second half display and they could end a pretty wretched run in recent years against Ireland. Ireland had lost by that stage a number of key first 15 players, but had a lot of strength on the bench, as we discovered in the second half. And then after about the 15-minute mark in the second half, Ireland conjured up 2 scores, changed the complexion of the game, and they just suffocated Scotland in the closing stages, in that final quarter. And Scotland's the ineffectiveness of the bench, a little bit of indiscipline, and I think a lack of, dare I say, a lack of belief. I think all that added to Ireland's overall dominance and their streetwise nature meant that by the time it was 22 points to 7, you simply couldn't see any way of Scotland getting back into the match. Yep,
8-7 it was for quite a long amount of time, and those 2 tries in 6 minutes really took the stuffing out of Scotland, no doubt about that. But looking at the stats, I mean, possession round about 50-50ish, territory a bit more for the Irish team, but as you say, you never felt that Scotland were really going to get back to even terms again.
Yeah, and the great thing about the opening 2 weekends was Scotland's points return for visits into the opposition 22. I mean, they were ruthless in the opening 2 matches. They played very well for long periods in the French game, and when we were here, all of us were here standing after some of the matches, the New Zealand game, the Argentina game and the autumn test, and said, when you're playing the world's best, you have to put together an 80-minute performance that includes the aggression, the concentration, the mental capacity to be able to withstand anything that comes towards you. Now, Ireland were able to do that, having lost the services. I know that the guys will talk in more detail about this, of some really important players. They spent a large portion of that second half with no recognised hooker on the park, so that restricted what they could do in the lineouts. But there was that belief. I mean, I think they finished the game with something like 12 of the 15 all Leinster players, and we know how good Leinster are, not just as a 15 or a 23, but as a club and as a feeder system, and what they alone have done for Irish rugby. And Scotland just couldn't find a way to get themselves back into the game. They were almost like a boxer that sustained 2 or 3 really heavy punches midway through the fight, stayed on the feet, made it a 12-round fight, but couldn't land a significant blow in the remaining rounds.
Now, Robin Purdie with us as well, doing the report on the match today. And when Hugh Jones went over for the try, there was a real hope right across the stadium. You could see that people were really getting into that, and they did have a 5-10 minute spell where they could have scored 2 or 3 tries, no doubt about it. Irish defence was very good, and of course Scotland, very, very good defence until they ran out of steam.
That's right, Stuart. I think that's where we've got to as a rugby playing nation, if you like, that Hugh Jones scored that try, and there was a sense in the stadium that we could kick on now and beat Ireland for the first time in however many years. I think they beat us 7 times on the trot. There was that sense in the stadium. You just maybe haven't had that so much in recent times, but it also exemplifies where Ireland are. They have come from the press conference. Andy Farrell, for all that he's done in both codes, spoke about this being as pleased as he's been with heart and guts and dealing with adversity, things that happened to him in the game. He was really waxing lyrical about that. So it shows where Ireland are, but it also shows where we've come now. That, to me, it's a step backwards today. It's one step back, having had several steps forward in recent times, and I count the France game in that as well. The France game not so long ago would have been a 50-pointer after a start like that. So we've taken a wee step back. I'm not overly despondent. The one wee nagging thing for me is that we play them again in the not too distant, and it's a crunch game. It's one of the two big crunch games, and it's a real shame. Actually, we're better than to be ranked where we are going into that World Cup tournament, and I'd just like us not to be playing Ireland in that, to be honest.
Yeah, they're certainly the bogey team at the moment, aren't they, Grahame? Grahame MacGregor here from BBC Radio Scotland.
Oh, certainly they are. I mean, it's interesting. That first half was pretty equal. Score showed that, and our hopes were high. And when we scored, there was just a moment I was looking at the Irish side. They almost looked on the point of being rattled, but it was never going to be much more than that. And the fact that they, despite their injuries and the fact that they knew that Scotland had this potential there, they managed just to get things together, and gradually then through, and those two tries of course in the second half really underlined that, and they just gradually then began to grind us down, which is what Ireland are so good at doing. And strength and depth shown with the fact that, some key players going off, and on came some key players to replace them. And Scotland, as Ireland rose, it so often happens in matches, as they rose mentally and physically as well in every way, they were getting it together in such a big way. At the same time, Scotland then just began to fall away. You just sort of felt, they were still trying, they were still getting moves going, but so many moves just ended in a knock-on or Ireland just stopping it, turning it over and so on. And that really meant that as the second half progressed, you just thought, this is just falling away from us, and that's the way it ended.
Now, you and I have been following Scotland-Ireland matches for longer than the other three here today, and we remember times when it was the other way around, when Scotland used to beat Ireland heavily, for about 7-8 games on the trot. What's actually happened in this last 20 years? Because we seem to have, as a nation, gone back, certainly down below in the grassroots rugby. Ireland seem to have come up with a system that really works for them. Scotland, it's not working.
Well, yes. Robin's going to speak in a minute, and I know what he's going to be talking about, because we had a chat during the press conference in the break there about that. But plainly, Ireland has got this. So much of it is based on Leinster, and Robin's going to talk about that. But it's relentless, isn't it? The kind of, and we could see that. Goodness me, you look to the future. Look what happened to the under-20s, and there's a bit of that in there as well. The difference between the way that the players are being developed at that age, and then on through to the more senior side, through there was mainly Leinster, but certainly the other three Irish provinces as well. They just have a set of systems going together, which just produces the kind of players we see. And we're much more fractured. We're pulling players in from different places and so on to make what is a good team, one of the best teams we've had for a long while. But the difference was out there today, really, to be seen, especially in that second half. And Ireland just had enough behind them, really, to cope with the problems. If we'd had some of those injuries, we would have been, I think, crumbling a lot quicker, and they didn't, and that almost marks the difference in the way it's not just physical, it's mental as well. Replacement
certainly was a big key to this match as well. We'll talk more about that very, very shortly, but let's bring in Robin, because a couple of days before this it was 82 points to 7. It could have been 100 for Ireland as well. Not in a good place in the under-20 levels, but as you say, you've been having a chat downstairs with a few interesting people.
Yeah, well, I was fortunate enough to have a chat at lunchtime with the great Donald Lenihan, no less, and he'd mentioned he'd been through in Glasgow on Friday night at the 20s game, and he actually asked me if he'd heard, is it the case that there's only really sort of 5 or 6 what you'd class as rugby schools now in Scotland? And I said to him, yes, there is, but in all reality there's probably only two or three that can win the Schools Cup. Don't profess to be an expert, but certainly Merchiston always seems to be there about Stumel, George Watson's, and
Boroughmuir, good.
Yeah, but there's not many, put it that way. And I said to him, I've heard that there's 8 in Dublin alone. He said, no, there's 16 top rugby schools in Dublin alone, and they all feed into Leinster, he said, but they farm them out now to the other provinces, and he said it's incredible. And he also mentioned that there are top level teams in France and England now coming over to look at Leinster as almost as a case study to see if they can recreate that. But he says they can't, they've got no chance. There is 16 top rugby schools that all have benefactors as well. Huge money being thrown into the rugby side by ex-alumni, wealthy ex-alumni. And what chance do we have when we've got 3 or 4 of these and they've got 16 in one province? It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, it's a real eye-opener, isn't it? Absolutely, and it takes us back again to today and what we've actually seen out there. And there's just a way about Ireland now. They're the number 1 team in the world. They get things done. They should have had the 4 tries at the end there when the ball went forward. But so they'll be disappointed personally with that particular match, but scoreline. But they are going to go on to win the Grand Slam, aren't they? They're going to beat England at Dublin.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. And I was driving back from our coverage game at Hoyt yesterday, and there was TalkSport pundits referring to the fact that Liverpool used to be referred to as, or not so long ago referred to as, mental monsters. I think it's a phrase that Jurgen Klopp used 2 or 3 years ago, mental monsters. They're no longer that. Now, that team out there today, adversity, line-outs being thrown in by flankers, they are mental monsters in the first degree. You could throw anything at that Irish outfit and they're going to deal with it. That's the sense I get at the moment anyway.
Because we all remember, and it wasn't that long ago, when Ireland were, having that bogey team of New Zealand, and now they've got that off the back, and I think they've beaten them 4 or 5 times.
Oh yeah, it's just hard to see who they're not going to strangle out of games. They've done it to France. They've done it to Wales. They've done it to us today. They did it a couple of times to New Zealand last summer. Autumn internationals. There's a World Cup looming on the horizon, and it would be a brave or foolish soul to bet against them, that's for sure.
Absolutely, it's going to be an interesting World Cup, that's for sure. Euan Welsh we're going to bring in now. Euan is the youngest member of Borders Rugby Television and Radio, and of course, we were overjoyed. A good win against England, a good win against Wales as well. But we mustn't forget, we've just played the first team in the world, the second team in the world, so it's not all doom and gloom.
I know. I think it gives us good learnings to take from it, and kind of give us a bit of a wake-up call after the high of the first 2 weeks. I think the general idea now that they've got a short turnaround before the game against Italy, and it'll be a case of getting their heads together and working out exactly where everything went wrong and how they can turn that around next week.
What do you think of the campaign overall? As I said, good wins against England, good win against Wales. Not a bad performance against Ireland at all. France, we know what happened with the red cards and the 19-0 down, but we came back strongly there. We've got Italy for our final game. Italy, no mugs these days. A lot of the under-20s from a couple of years ago have now found their way into the national team and have done very well. So we've got a history of losing to Italy and tight wins. What's going to happen next week?
I think it's difficult to try and sum up exactly how you would measure the campaign, because I think there's different ways of trying to work out how well it's went. I think at the end of the day, we've been in the position before where we've put in good performances, but at the end of the day, when you look at the table at the end of the six weeks or the however many games, it's a case of looking at it and going, well, we're 3rd place, we're 4th place, but even though we can say, we've played really well in other games, at the end of the day, if we don't convert that in at the point on the table and get the trophies, the Triple Crown was up for grabs today and whatnot, then in future years we'll look back and it would just another kind of failed campaign. But I think going forward into next week, it turns into a kind of a real crunch game, because win it and it's 3 wins and 2 reasons for why things didn't go away, but lose it and suddenly it's a loss against Italy, that'll carry with it a huge kind of cloud over our heads, and it's just one of those. It is a huge crunch game next week.
Stuart McFarlane, bring you back in. You weren't actually at the conference down there, but of course a couple of matches ago they were talking about, we've got to hang on to Gregor Townsend as head coach. We're doing really well. Everything's beginning to gel. We meet France, we meet Ireland. The results haven't gone our way, but what about the performance? Would you say that Gregor should still be in with a chance after the World Cup?
Well, I think he's done an awful lot to adapt since the World Cup in Japan, and I think from an attack point of view he's been able to make the side that bit more dynamic than they were before. Times past we would come here and we would watch Dan Parks kick 15 points or Greg Laidlaw kick 15 points or Duncan Weir drop a goal to win a game by a point in the last minute, and you think, well, we played another Monopoly get out of jail free card to win that game. So I think going forward, there's into double figures in terms of the amount of tries they've scored in the Championship with a game to go, and that hasn't always been the case. So that is a plus point. The fact that he has changed direction to some degree after the previous World Cup, and I think he's brought in, obviously, Steve Tandy as defence coach, and I think defensively over the piece they've improved. I think if you look in isolation at the Championship so far, I think they played very well against England, played very well against Wales. I think they had to put in a good performance against France, and they'll be bitterly disappointed to have lost that Fiku try right at the end of the game. And I think today it was a 42, 43 minute display, started to fall away a little bit before the 50-minute mark, and then they fell out of the game, so they were not able again to back it up game after game after game. That sort of level of intensity and mental concentration. And I think you really don't like putting any player under the microscope, but Euan van der Merwe tonight will probably look at maybe aspects of his contribution going forward. Great opportunity where if he'd offloaded, he'd two players on his right hand side inside the Ireland 22 in the first half that could easily have completed another score for the Scots. And defensively, when you look at how he was tracking back across the 22, he might have been able to have done a little bit more to have stopped Jack Conan, or made it a little bit harder for Conan to score the try. So and of course he was involved in trying to deny Ireland's opening try as well. So it's players like of the importance of Van der Merwe, that Ireland don't have necessarily these creases to still iron out of players or give them that little bit more sort of rugby nous. They have that already in spades. And going back to one or two of the points that Robin quite rightly raised, because the structure isn't necessarily in place in Scotland, what is the default option? It's going out and finding Scots qualified, who are ready-made players at a higher level that can come in at international level and take the place of maybe a youngster coming through that at 15 you're still trying to wean off Iron Brew and crisps, and get them physically and mentally sorted out to be somewhere remotely close to where they are in Dublin at that time, because they don't have that issue in Dublin. So that ultimately I would imagine is going to put more onus on the personnel that are employed by Scottish Rugby to go out and see X, Y and Z, all Scottish qualified. They'll come in, they might need a bit of an education in the culture of Scottish Rugby, but as a player they have the skill set that is better than what we have coming through. And if that is always going to be an option, that is then perhaps going to be the short-term fix that Scotland look for, while they continually try and work out what the long-term plan's going to be.
Well, we've obviously seen a team on the pitch today, well, two teams on the pitch. One is number 1 in the world, Scotland number 5 in the world, the first time they've played under that banner of being 5th. They looked pretty comfortable out there for a large part of that game. They've got Italy next week, the final Six Nations game, then loads of World Cup warm-ups, and then we're into the World Cup itself. But do you think that this particular team, as it stands at the moment, when you look back to the start of the Six Nations, everyone was saying if we can get 3 wins, then we'll be pretty satisfied with that. If we beat Italy comfortable, then I think that would be a good campaign.
Yeah, it's about how high you want to set the bar. And 3 wins, is a perfectly respectable return, given that, as you say, it's an unusual set of circumstances for the Six Nations Championship to have the best 2 ranked teams in the world taking part in the Championship. And what is borderline ridiculous is a World Cup draw made 2.5 years, 3 years before the World Cup that has an incredibly heavily weighted side of the draw and a much lighter side of the draw. So, if it's going to be skewed, then you just need to look at the draw as it is at the moment based on world rankings, and you have to say that Scotland are in, it's not so much a group of death, but it's a whole section of peril that they find themselves in. So it's how high you want to set the bar, but it's getting up towards that 100% level of performance. How close can you get week upon week upon week? And if you want to get that Triple Crown, you've got to better that second half, but still play as well as you did against England, play as well as you did against France, and really put the chills on Wales as well. So do all of that, and it's these players still learning that they've got one game under their belt, second game under the belt, 2 wins, go over to France, play well, 1 or 2 missed opportunities, but then fall away so early in the second half against Ireland, and you think, okay, that's progress. But that just shows how much they've still got to do if that bar is to get that bit higher. And I think there'll be a lot of pressure on Ireland. I think they're more than capable of dealing with it. But Ireland have never been in a Rugby World Cup semi-final. So this is a huge prize for them now. And it's all about Andy Farrell knowing, where the top of the mountain is, how close they are to the top of the mountain now, and knowing that the actual peak shouldn't be reached until sometime in kind of late October, later this year.
How much is that going to play on their mind, the fact that they've never been in a semi-final? Nerves and things like that.
To be honest, I don't necessarily think it should. I mean, we all like looking back on success stories in the past, and when Scotland played England here in the World Cup semi-final in 1991, and an occasion where they missed 3 points that I think, had the game been played now, the person kicking that penalty and missing from in front of the post wouldn't have been allowed to take the kick. He would have been marched away. He said, look, you're not in any fit state to be taking charge of the penalty. So you think back to these moments. I think Ireland are forward-thinking, and I think that's maybe beneficial as well, that with each success they'll enjoy it, but they'll move on, and they won't necessarily take too much time to say, but you remember when we did this in 87, or we did this in 91, or we lost to so-and-so in 1995. I think because they're so forward-thinking that they won't be overly concerned that they haven't made a semi-final before. But again, I mean, they're part of this section of peril, and they've got a lot of big hurdles to cross to make it to the latter stages of the tournament. And if they have a fully fit squad, and if they avoid an episode of casualty like it was today, with they would be filling up the Western General Casualty Department the way they were going, then they're more than capable of making the semi-finals and beyond. And
one of these people was, of course, Gary Ringrose, getting his 50th cap today, Stuart Hogg winning his 100th, and we can't do this episode without mentioning the great Stuart Hogg, 100 caps today. Nice to see his family involved as well, bringing the ball on as well. And Grahame MacGregor, you've seen, I think, pretty much the whole 100 here, haven't you?
And more. Sadly, both those players who had landmarks today, Gary Ringrose and Stuart Hogg, left the field with injuries, and it's doubtful for next week from both, in fact, which is a bit of a sad one. So, and to some extent, yeah, I mean, Stuart's great day had the lustre taken off it by the result, and I suppose also by him with his injury, because he is a wee bit without for next week at the moment, apparently. But overall, though, I mean, 100, he's the 5th centurion, I think. Yes, he's 5th centurion that Scotland's turned out.
4 male, 1 female.
That's correct, yeah. And every chance, I suppose, if he keeps on going after the World Cup, of surpassing Ross Ford, who's the largest number of male caps at the moment.
Another borderer.
And indeed, the borderers, and of course, obviously, not to forget Mossy, who's just one or two behind him. But no, he's had. We go back to when he was just about to come into the Scotland team and scoring that wonderful try for Scotland A against the Saxons down at Netherdale. And that sort of set him on his way, and he's had some great displays. He, of course, is the leading try scorer now for Scotland. Surpassed that. There was one moment earlier in the match there today. He saw the ball going towards that corner, and he put on some pace to try and get there. It looked like he had the determination to mark this match with a try, but unfortunately it just didn't come his way. And but overall, it's been a magnificent record so far, and it's not one that's ended. And he's just been a great player for Scotland.
Now here's one for you. When did he first play at Murrayfield?
That's a good question.
Good question. I'm sure you've got the answer, Stuart.
I think I've got an answer. We'll throw that out. I think it was 20 years ago. I think he was part of the Trinity School that played here in 2003, and I'm trying desperately to remember which side Scotland were playing when it was like a little half-time run-around. So I'm sure he played out in the park when he would be, about 10 years old?
My goodness me. Well, we'll have to ask him about
Something
that.
to check out.
He was
Yes,
at
indeed,
Trinity. But yeah, I think that would be his first outing. So it's... his Scotland career 100 caps, but his actual participation at Murrayfield potentially spans 20 years.
Wow. And of course, Euan Welsh is only about 20 himself, so we'll bring you back in because you're from Hawick as well. Tell me the impact that Stuart Hogg has on the town. Okay, he plays for Exeter, and he plays obviously international rugby level, but you can inform a lot of people about his connection with the town, what he does when he comes on his off days, when he's up here. He goes down to the club and gets part of the community. It's a real big thing that doesn't get a great deal of attention, but you obviously know a lot like that.
I think the thing that I think, well, for me anyway, is the fact that he's so involved when he does come back, and his family in general are all very well connected with loads of different things. His mum and dad are involved in a lot of different groups in Hawick anyway, and I think everybody just kind of knows that he's just a normal person. He doesn't come back to Hawick with like a celebrity status or anything like that, and I think he enjoys that. So I think he enjoys being back in amongst people who just treat him as a normal person, rather than being this kind of famous celebrity. But I think the contribution that then has is that you've got a lot of then young kids who then look up to him. We saw that yesterday at Mansfield. There was a lot of kids there to watch, and they'll all be very aware of who Stuart Hogg is and that he is from Hawick, and they'll be very aware of the contribution that he's then had on the national team.
And there's no coincidence, really, and you hark back to yesterday, and that was a big event of which Hawick won the Scottish Championship. Robin Purdie was there commentating on the match against Curry. It was some finish, that's for sure. But the crowd that were there, the enthusiasm, the response, the fact that Hawick had never won this in the last 21 years, it was a big event for the town. And, Stuart Hogg's brother Grahame, very much part as a tax coach, and his dad, director of rugby of the club as well. I mean, huge event.
Yeah, and what a weekend for the Hawick Rugby Club and the town of Hawick, as you mentioned yesterday. A couple of Hoggs hugely involved in the success over the whole season, which culminated in that win yesterday. Grahame, his father John's the director of rugby at Hawick, and of course they were both here today to see their brother stroke other son run out for 100 caps for Scotland. It doesn't get any better than that, and Euan's absolutely right. They in Hawick, Euan will know better than me, I have connections to Hawick myself. They are very, very proud of their own when their own have success, and it's just a great story for the whole Hogg family.
And it really is in the borders. You don't get above your raising, do you? I mean, you can soon get put back down to earth, couldn't you, Stuart McFarlane?
Pretty much taking the words out of my mouth there. I was going to say that you don't get too big for your boots, and you don't get above your station in the border. And there's nothing wrong with that in terms of being able to keep your feet on the ground. And the success that he had at Glasgow, the success he's gone on to enjoy at Exeter, that takes a lot of hard work. And sometimes as well, when things don't work out and you have to come back from a period, whether it be a loss of form or whether it be an injury or something like that, but you can come back and you can get close to something like your best. I mean, he's only, I think, one of two players in the modern Six Nations Championship to win back-to-back player of the tournament. So that in itself is an illustration of where he was 5 or 6 years ago. And yes, he cut a pretty disconsolate figure, which is an odd thing to say on his 100th cap, to come off to get the adulation of a lot of players, a lot of supporters rather, in the West Stand, both in fairness Irish and Scottish supporters, and the same when Johnny Sexton was taken off as well, that a large swathe of the crowd were responding to his contribution as a player. But I think Stuart is the type of person that will be fully aware of what he has achieved, but he's certainly not necessarily going to dine out on that, because there'll be a lot of people that will, have a quiet word in his ear and remember your upbringing and that, and he doesn't need that, because, coming up in the borders and with it being rugby as well, I think perhaps footballers have a different mindset to rugby players in that sense.
Well, that just about wraps it up from a view from the commentary box for today here at BT Murrayfield. We have, of course, played the number 1 team and the number 2 team. couple of defeats, but we're not too downhearted, and we look forward to Italy next week. It's an early start for Scotland, 12:30 kick-off, and well, let's hope that they end their season in style as far as the Guinness Six Nations is concerned, with 3 wins out of 5. That's it from us, and my thanks to Stuart McFarlane, to Robin Purdie, Euan Welsh, Grahame MacGregor, and from me, Stuart Cameron. Bye-bye for now.